We've just asked them to start the webcast, so we should be going live now.
Excellent. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Development Plan panel. I'm Councillor Neil Walshaw, and I'm your chair. Just got a few things to go through in my usual script to make sure we're all legally compliant, so I'll do that. Just want to tell any members of the public watching on the World Wide Web that members have started this meeting in a feisty mood, and I'm slightly concerned as to how things are going to go today, but let's try. So this meeting is COVID secure and held in a socially distant manner in accordance with regulations. We are broadcasting on the council's YouTube channel to ensure that members of the public can observe what we're doing. And transparency is how we conduct things on this council. Just like to remind members that our health and safety guidance from our officers tells us we have to conduct our business within 90 minutes. So conciseness and brevity would be really appreciated. We've got a lot of interesting stuff to do today, I think we can get through this. So I'm going to do introductions and go around in alphabetical order. So I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. So Councillor Anderson is first.
Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlin Wharfdale Ward.
Councillor Brooks will be next, but unfortunately she has to self-isolate at the moment. Councillor Campbell is in another meeting. He'll be joining us shortly. So Councillor Lamb, please.
Councillor Alan Lamb, representing Wetherby Ward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Collins.
Councillor Dawn Collins, Horsforth Ward.
I believe Councillor Finnegan is in the same meeting as Councillor Campbell will be joining us. So Councillor Gruen.
Hello, Councillor Caroline Gruen, Bramley and Stanningley Ward.
Councillor Hayden.
Good afternoon, Councillor Helen Hayden, Temple Newson Ward and Exec Member for Infrastructure and Climate.
Thank you very much. Councillor McKenna.
Good afternoon, Councillor Jim McKenna, the Army Ward.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Taylor.
Good afternoon, Councillor Taylor, Chapel Allerton Ward.
Turning to officers, Martin Elliott.
Martin Elliott, Head of Strategic Planning.
David Feeney.
Good afternoon, everybody. David Feeney, Chief Planning Officer for Leeds.
Thank you very much. Richard Marsh.
Good afternoon, Richard Marsh, Senior Nature Conservation Officer.
Thank you. Nadia Khan.
Good afternoon, Nada Khan, Architect and Senior Design Officer with Development Department.
Thank you so much.
Nikki Diol, Head of Property and Planning in Legal Services.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So let's move to agenda item 1. So Tash, if I could hand over to you for those items, please.
Thanks, Chair. Under agenda item 1, there's no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Agenda item 2, there's no items which require the exclusion of the press and public. Agenda item 3, there's no formal late items today. Agenda item 4, please can I ask members to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests. Under agenda item 5, apologies have been received from Councillors Brooks, and we're also expecting Councillors Finnegan and Campbell to join us shortly.
Thank you so much. Right, so agenda item 6, colleagues, if you could turn your attention to the minutes of the last meeting, starting on page 7 in your papers. I'm not going to go through these on a page by page manner. I'm going to anticipate that members have read the minutes. Is there anything members want to raise in the minutes or any matters arising from either members or officers? Mr. Elliott, yeah, indicating.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the local plan update, just to alert members to what I'm sure they already know, that Executive Board endorsed consultation on the material that's subject to these minutes, and pre-publicity on the local plan update will begin next Monday on the 12th of July, and the formal consultation will start on the 19th of July, running until the middle of September.
That, I'm sure we can all agree, is excellent news that we're making progress on our climate emergency-led local plan review. Wonderful. So no further matters arising. Can I have someone to move the minutes as a true record? Any members? Yep. Nods around the room. Fantastic. Thanks very much. Okay then. So turning to agenda item 7. So this is the update arising from current and future national guidance changes. As we're all well aware, members, there is an awful lot going on in the world of planning emanating from government. So we thought it was a timely moment to bring an update and have discussion and debate on this. So I think without any further ado, Martin, I'll just hand over to you. Structure it how you want. I think there's a lot to go through, but be my guest.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So agenda item 7, which really comprises 3 updates, one around the National Model Design Code, one around biodiversity net gain, and finally around first homes. So I've brought officers in to talk about these separate matters. Nada Khan will talk about the National Model Design Code, Richard Marsh about biodiversity net gain, and I'll finish off on first homes. So if I hand over to Nada and he'll give a short introduction to the National Model Design Code, and then I think, Chair, it's probably easier if members then ask clarification and questions after that introduction.
Good afternoon. As you probably already know, earlier this year, we were successful in being selected amongst 13 other authorities to test specific elements of the National Design Code. And at the 2nd of March DPP, we reported that in a diverse urban authority such as Leeds, we would opt to look at testing the area type approach of the programme. Now, since then, we've made good progress, really good progress in producing an overview of GIS layers showing how all the 109 community areas in Leeds can be split into typologies. And that means, i.e. urban neighbourhoods, inner suburbs, outer suburbs, town and city centres, etc., as laid out in the design code. And to support this, we've also drawn down data to include housing densities to back up our typology designations. And as work's progressed, the work streams have naturally split. There's 2 teams working. One is currently looking at development sites within the community areas across the city to investigate how much consistency there is within an area type and what might be sought from new developments. The other team are currently working on methodologies for engaging with neighbourhood forums, developer groups, and other interested stakeholders. All being well, we're looking to present a National Model Design Code workshop for DPP members early in September, where issues can be raised and discussed so that they can be reflected in our final report to MHCLG in late September. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Looking at our papers, have members got any questions to raise at this point? I've got Councillor Anderson, yeah? And Councillor Gray.
Just quickly, in paragraph 6, where we're going to be splitting areas into whatever the categories are going to be. When we did that the last time for the site allocations plan, that did lead to a degree of controversy. For example, there was a site in Pudsey that the council, which is next to Bradford actually, which they classed as rural, and parts of my ward they declared as being part of the urban fringe. Well, both of them are wrong, to be quite frank. So how are we going to be sure that we get it in the right, we get the categories right? Because if you, again, being parochial, if you look at my ward, you could argue that mine is urban, Adel Cookridge is urban, but there's no way you could describe Poole, Bramhope and Arlington as urban. So are we going to have splits during wards, or are we going to make a decision to put a ward in a category one way or the other?
I think from a lot of members' point of view, that's the set of $1 million questions there. So Nadir, do you want to come in on that, and then I'll bring other members in?
Yes, what we're not actually splitting the community areas into typologies. We're testing to see if those community areas can be split into typologies. So there's a slightly different methodology that we're using here. Does that answer the question?
I'll wait until we go to the seminar and probably probe it a bit further there, in fairness.
Yeah, I think, Chair, just for members' benefit, these are exactly the sorts of issues that we'll be giving back to MHCLG to tell them whether we think the National Model Design Code can work in a city like Leeds. So it's those sorts of nuances that, as we're testing to see whether we can actually compartmentalise and discreetly section up parts of Leeds into single typologies, that will be valuable information for the government moving forward.
Makes September's workshop really important, and looking forward to that. So I've got a couple more members wanting to come in. So I've got Caroline, Jim, and then
I'm just struggling a little bit with the philosophy behind the model that you're testing. So what exactly is a typology, and what kind of categories might there be in terms of typologies? And how would that relate to design exactly? Is there a built-in factor that would prevent us from going down the, the leafy lane posh areas get very good standards of design and the inner city areas get less so? How do the typologies relate to aspects of design?
Okay, so this is one of the things that we're trying to test to see whether a design code could actually work across the various neighbourhood community areas. So, for example, if we're looking at, so the typologies are set out in the National Modern Design Code Guide, and I think there's 9 or 10 typologies, and they go from anywhere from a rural area down to the city centre area with, we've got it written here, we've got it as urban neighbourhoods, inner suburbs, outer suburbs, town, city centres, rural, industrial. So we've got to imagine how a code is going to be developed for each one of those typologies. So if we go and look at an urban neighbourhood which has got 2 or 3 different typologies in it, then we would look at doing a code for that particular typology for that area. Does that make sense?
Well, as you say, we'll be picking finer detail when we get to the workshop. It doesn't make easy sense to me, no, I've got to say.
I think that's one of the things that's coming out of this testing program, because we're not actually writing the codes at the moment. We're testing to see if codes would work in a city such as, with the diverse areas such as Leeds. So it may end up at the end of this in September, after we've had our workshop, that we go back to MHCLG and say, well, we've looked at doing it as area typologies, and it doesn't work in a city like Leeds because it's just so diverse.
I think that's a really useful clarification to do. I think I think we're testing proof of concept here. I think. I know you want to come in, Mr. Feeney's got something to add that's really relevant, and then you're next, Eileen. Sorry, it's Jim next, actually. David, do you want to?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. It was just to help clarify for Councillor Gruen. I think the way I'm looking at this, Councillor Gruen, is on the basis of the work that we're doing at the moment to test this methodology is almost about establishing a baseline to understand what the character of different areas are, and then in representing that character down the line, it's about coming up with design solutions that are appropriate within that character, if that makes sense. But essentially at the moment what we're doing is road testing if the concept actually works. And I think one of the issues we had at the outset is that we didn't want sort of a one-size-fits-all approach nationally being imposed upon Leeds. We wanted to develop something from a bottom-up perspective that works for us on a day-to-day basis. So I'm really pleased that we've been able to get involved with the pilot. Thank you, Chair.
If I may come back just briefly. I'm pleased we're involved as well, and I'm sure it's very interesting work. But what you've just described, I'm thinking about my own ward, and we have a lot of not terribly attractive council estates that were built 60s, 70s, and a very unattractive shopping centre that was built in the same era. And I wouldn't be wanting to develop any design codes that reflected the character of those.
Yeah, we're a good place to test, I think, to be part of involved in pilots, to do with because we're a city with quite a broadly drawn boundary, including lots of rural areas as well as all the different types of urban areas. We're a good place to come and experiment with, so to speak. Councillor McKenna, Jim, you're next. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at paragraph 25, and I note that in the inner city areas, only 17% of people can afford a mortgage of 100,000. and only 1% can afford £160,000. I know in the report it talks about levelling up that the discount could go to 40 or 50%. And I think it's important that we bear that in mind when we actually come to our final reports. It does seem to me that the buzzwords of the day is levelling up, isn't it? Not only levelling up in the north, but levelling up in the city. You know, I mean, the disparities between some wards in Leeds is just as great as there is in the London area and the northern area. So I think we need to have a firm grip on that and keep it very firmly in mind as we move forward. My second question relates to the same thing, and it's not in the report, but it's my old chestnut. Developers crying, this is unaffordable. We can't provide any housing whatsoever, any affordable housing. Is the first home policy exempt from this, or can they still cry foul and say, sorry, Boris, but it's a no-go because we simply can't afford it?
We're going to do first homes, Jim. I agree with everything you said. We're going to do first homes in some detail once we've finished off with the pilot scheme, the design code pilot scheme. Thank you, Kathleen. Yeah, the design code pilot scheme. But yeah, no. So we'll cover those questions then, and they are very good questions. Councillor Collins, you're next on my list.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm still on the model design codes. I was just curious. The officers have said in the report there'll be 1 to 10 suggested area types. But how big are the areas going to be? Because I think this is going back to what Councillor Anderson said. I think part of the problem with the HMCAs, the housing market characteristic areas, was they were too big, really. And you could get a diverse range of different house types within those areas. So when you're looking at these models, how big do you think these areas are going to be? Small estates, villages, or are you looking at dividing the city up in a similar way to the HMCAs?
I think it's important, Councillor Collins, to clarify this, and I can see why you've approached the question from that way, because there's actually quite a lot of zoning going on within the planning reforms at the moment, an area-based change. The model design code, as I understand it, will, if we go down an area type approach, seek to define standard designs for as big as we think that area should be. Now, that doesn't necessarily overlay or have any correlation with housing market characteristic areas or settlements. It will be whatever of the 1 to 10 design codes that are in the national guidance, how they fit and how they best fit within different parts of Leeds. But there will be, if government take through its planning reforms, other areas that overlay onto the geography of Leeds that determine whether you're an area of growth or whether you're an area of restraint, or whether you're an area of renewal. Those areas will not necessarily correlate with the National Model Design Code areas. They'll determine which places grow, which places have a kind of an area of protection. It's the design code's job to front load what that growth looks like in broad terms in any given area typology. Now, other authorities across England at the moment are testing the design code in different ways. Some of them are testing it in relation to large site allocations. Some of them are testing it in relation to planning briefs. And government may decide that the best way to implement the National Model Design Code is to accompany allocations. So for instance, the Leeds Site Allocations Plan under a design code might actually have more detail as to what the design of each housing allocation would be as it comes forward. But what we've been asked to do, and what we've suggested to government that we do, is set a baseline for the whole of Leeds to see if we can split every parcel of land within Leeds into a certain design typology. So at the moment, we don't know whether the government's going to go with one approach or whether it's going to go with a number of different approaches that could be rolled out within any authority.
Okay, that sounds a bit backwards in some ways, because if we're looking at the sites and then defining them, that's not actually going to speed the process up, is it? Because I thought the whole point of this change was to try and speed up development planning permissions. But second to that, so are we actually going to use census data? Are we looking at the areas that the census defines as well? Because they are actually quite small chunks, aren't they, that give you a lot of data in there. Are officers using that?
So I think I'll go back to Nada's answer, where he was talking about the splitting up into community areas. I don't know whether, Nada, whether you want to say a bit more on that.
Yes, we've looked at the community areas as are laid out in Neighbours for Living. You can find all the way that the areas are split up there. And what we've done to back up our data on our is produce overlays on GIS, which take the densities of housing densities, so we can see where, so you can differentiate between suburb and outer suburb on the actual densities of the housing. So we're using that, but we can have a look at how census data can be used as well, I think.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, I was going to ask the same question on census, if you're going to make a decision around census. So that's been answered. But in paragraph 8C, it says, how would we engage with others when preparing the design code? Who are the others you will be talking to?
It's Councillor Taylor, it's the engagement and community consultation is really high on the list of items in the design code, and there is one of the work streams that we're looking at is how to methodologies engaging with neighboured forums. The others that you talk about are neighboured forums, developer groups, and any other interested parties, including ward members. So it's anybody who's got any group or any person that's got an interest in any of the land that we're looking at.
Sorry, Chair, please bear with me. I'm new in planning. I'm not 100% familiar. But when is this deadline supposed to be? And have you started talking? Because over the past few months, years, the conversation in communities always be at the end and rush. So I would advise that the communication start at an earlier time before the deadlines.
Yeah, so what we're looking at is the methodologies at the moment. We're not actually going to be, we will be presenting a workshop to be held with ward members and DPP members and early in September. But we're looking at the way that we would engage and take that back to MHCLG and say that this is how we would engage with neighbourhood forums. They've already got neighbourhood plans. We would include information on neighbourhood plans. We would speak to ward members. We would look at other community groups. So I think at the moment, what we're looking at is the methodology that we will use to engage with developers, any stakeholders that have interest in land that's going to be developed.
Right, folks. Thanks for those questions. Look forward to September's workshop. Councillor Anderson, you're indicating, is it just on this one, yeah?
Yeah, prompted this. When we talk about design, are we talking about trying to fit things into the types of housing and the amount of green space that goes around? Because, for example, in some parts of the city centre, it is vital that we have green space around housing, but the space available would preclude that happening on one side of things. And if you've got a housing needs assessment that says in a particular area you need a particular type of housing, the one that a lot of us bring forward, bungalows, for example, which might not fit in with the design code that the area has been put into, because when you get down to the more micro level or granularity, depending on what you want to call it. So how's this going to reflect those types of concerns, or do I wait until the September workshop before we have that debate?
Well, it's funny you should say that. I mean, look, we tend to view design in the broadest terms to start with, and then focusing. And that's the approach we'll probably take. But Martin, did you very briefly on that?
Yeah, I think government in the design code are really keen to see this as more than just what the building looks like and recognise its setting. You'll be aware that the local plan update has an intent to put new policies in about placemaking. So, and we've also got neighbourhoods for living, which sets very detailed criteria-based aspirations for good design and placemaking in Leeds. The way I see this is it's going to be an amalgam of all three. So the design codes won't simply focus on what the buildings look like. It will have to relate to what local policy and local placemaking ambitions are as well.
Well, it's a case of watch this space with interest, isn't it, really? I'm sure officers will keep us appraised as we build towards September's workshop. I want to move on to biodiversity, thanks, and then we'll get on to first homes, and we'll start off with Councillor McKenna's questions that you raised at that point. Let's do biodiversity.
Yes, okay. So I'm here to talk about biodiversity net gain. It's a phrase you're getting more familiar with and seeing me more often at your meetings. To try and summarise what we're doing, it's in line with a piece of legislation called the Environment Bill, which has been passing through various stages. It's gone through the House of Commons. It's now with the House of Lords, coming towards the end of, well, it'll be stage 3 soon, I think. So we're looking for royal assent for the Environment Bill round about autumn this year. It might be late autumn this year, I think. What that really means is within 2 years of that date, so the back end of 2023, it will be mandatory to deliver biodiversity net gain to an actual percentage figure, and that's a minimum of 10%. So the critical thing we have to consider now is how we're preparing for that and how we're trying to align our policies so we can meet that commitment. And what really are the implications of that? It's not just about achieving a 10% figure. It's thinking, what does that really mean to developers? I mean, obviously you can't achieve a net gain of biodiversity within a development site, very often anyway, there's a caveat there, but most of the time when we're talking about employment schemes, residential schemes, 80% of the land area is being changed from whatever it was to built surface, sealed surface. So we have to acknowledge there's going to have to be an off-site option for the biodiversity to be delivered. So that's something we need to start thinking about quite deeply. So in line with that, myself and the other West Yorkshire districts, we've been getting together. We've formed a West Yorkshire net gain partnership, steering group, as it were. And we're making sure that hopefully all the districts can work towards the same procedures or governance systems. And we're actually employing a consultant for 6 months to drill down into exactly what we need to do, because we know this is going to be an extra burden on us as a local authority. It might be that sharing some of that burden across West Yorkshire may be beneficial financially and also for biodiversity as well, because biodiversity doesn't stop at our district border. So there's an awful lot to think about. I don't want to go through it in an awful lot of detail now, but there's a summary in the report you've got, and I'm here to answer any questions, really. I suppose the main thing to just say before we do that is we do have a policy at the moment, G9, which actually talks about achieving a net gain for biodiversity. We've had that for a number of years. So to a degree, we're ahead of the game there. That came from the NPPF wording years ago. We never stated a percentage alongside that policy wording. So that's why now we think it's important we're going for at least that minimum figure that is being talked about in the Environment Bill. Okay.
That's a really helpful starter. I mean, just thinking in terms of practical terms, obviously there are things we'll be looking at this as it comes to royal assent, and we'll be looking at what does this practically mean. Oh, sorry, folks, that's me. I know, that's really bad, isn't it? As a chair. I know. Well, now, focus. Easy, right now. back to the question. Just thinking in terms of like a practical matter for, say, members would be, say, on a plans panel. And if we're looking for, say, a development coming forward of, say, between 100 to 300 homes, which is not unusual, right? If we're looking at a biodiversity gain on that site, will this enable us to, say, effectively mandate hedgerows rather than fencing between properties? Just thinking in practical terms, Richard, would that be something that we could progress? Because that would be, I think most members who sit on plans panels would agree, that would be a significant biodiversity gain for a lot of housing developments, new developments. What about that kind of thing? Just as a practical idea.
Yeah, I think what we find, we've got this thing called the DEFRA metric now, which measures biodiversity in biodiversity units. Think what you like about numerical values for things. It's going to be really useful. So what it should do, the big picture thing is it should involve the ecologist for the developer getting involved at a very early design stage. It doesn't traditionally happen at the moment. You tend to get a master plan fixed or a layout. Then their ecologist comes in and retrofits the metric calculations to what's already been agreed. What this should do is they've got a big incentive now to reduce the number of biodiversity units they're losing in the first place. So it should come in earlier in the design stage, but also they'll be thinking more creatively, how can we get more positive scores through the on-site delivery? And I think hedgerows are the one thing that we will see more of, provided they're native species-rich hedgerows. We'll certainly see them outside of the curtilages of dwellings, but maybe sometimes within as well. Because within the metric, there's three elements. One is general habitats. The other one is linear features, which are hedgerows. So there's a particular part of the metric to do with hedgerows. So if you've got to achieve a net gain in hedgerows, if there weren't any there in the first place, you've got to put some in there. And the last part of the metric is rivers, so watercourses, that kind of thing. So if it's affecting a watercourse, it's got to show not just getting it back to the same state, but a positive situation as well. So I think by default of this existing, we will see better design for ecology on site as well.
Excellent. That sounds very promising. Councillor Lamb, then Councillor Collins, then Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. And two issues I have that I wonder if you can address with this. First of all is, again, in practical terms, when this comes to planning applications, how do we make sure it's not the developers that are telling us what the net gain is, and they're not marking their own homework, and we don't have a new Volkswagen situation with emissions and things like that. And the second aspect is really a concern about, I can understand that you need to have the ability to deliver off-site net gain. My concern is that's almost a charter to destroy habitats and ecosystems on site, as long as you find somewhere else to put them. And I'd like to make sure the default is that you protect what's already there, unless there's absolutely no other way to do it.
Yes, they're very good points there. I mean, the guidance that comes along with the metric and within the Environment Bill as well, it's quite clear in saying the mitigation hierarchy does not change to what it is now. You should always, first of all, avoid damaging impacts, then you're mitigating damage, then as a last resort, it's compensation, which is the off-site scenario. So we still have to make a judgment call on what's coming forward through every planning application. We have to do that. To a degree, the metric penalises removal of habitats, because if you're removing an area of scrub, and I talk about scrub in a very fond way, it's a good habitat. If you're removing scrub, that's going to mean you're losing a lot of biodiversity units that you've then got to make up somehow. So there's an incentive built into the metric to retain such kinds of habitats. But yes, I totally agree with what you're saying. It's something we'll have to keep a very careful eye on. One solution to that would be, if you've got to go off-site to deliver instead, then if it's going to cost you a lot more money, that's a disincentive, isn't it? And that's something we do have to think about, because the way this system is probably going to work is, if an application comes in and they've got to deliver something off-site, the developer can first of all look for any other land they own nearby, and they can choose to deliver those biodiversity units on that land. Just that one factor alone we have to think about and think, is it in a location we'd be happy with? Do we want public access to that piece of land? So there's an element we'd have to think about even in that scenario. but not dwelling on that too much. Another scenario would be they could offer to pay the council a sum of money, and we will take on the responsibility for the biodiversity units, and we will work out where they're going to be delivered, on whose land. It could be council land. We may go into partnership with the Wildlife Trust or other community groups and say, if you're purchasing land, you know, provided it hits a certain number of criteria that we would have to specify, that may be okay. So you can see there's an awful lot of background work in this. This is why the policy wording alone will not enable us to do probably what we want to do. We'll have to have some form of SPD that goes into more detail of the actual what we really are going to do. Because I think what you're alluding to there is, have we got a vision for what we want to do for biodiversity in Leeds? If somebody wants to deliver biodiversity off-site, what is our vision? Where do we want it to be? Are we happy with it being just on private land? Do we want it to be on our own land that we already own? Do we want to purchase new land to create new nature reserves? These are all questions that I'm putting to you and can be part of the answer should we so wish. So that's just for you to think about, really.
I think would so Councillor Lamb raised the questions about who's going to be developers going to be marking their own homework. And just as an addendum to that is, there are resource implications for local authorities in all of these issues. Things that can sound very laudable in a piece of legislation means that the chief planner officer's got to find more warm bodies to do more work. And if local authorities are stretched, does that, what are the implications there? I think they're real concerns for us.
Yeah, it is. It's an extra burden, definitely, on all local authorities. I mean, we haven't had to do this before. What's happening now is we already have guidance on our website that is trying to preempt this and move everybody in the right direction. And so we need that guidance. And what that means is we're acknowledging there's more complicated ecological reports coming in now. They're using Excel spreadsheets, quite rightly, that the metric is an Excel spreadsheet, but it's quite a complicated piece of work. I mean, I understand it, but you'd expect me to, because I'm the ecologist for the council. It's meant I've actually slowed down significantly in the applications I'm getting through on a day-to-day basis. And the more reports we're getting in using these spreadsheets, it is going to mean we need to look at what resources we've got now and what resources we're going to need in the future, not just for ecology, but planning officers, enforcement, because there might be times where those biodiversity units aren't being delivered properly and we have to get enforcement involved. We've got the GIS teams that need to be involved as well, because monitoring and reporting of all these biodiversity units is very important. The Environment Bill is saying those biodiversity units, wherever they're being delivered, on-site or off-site, they've got to be monitored and reported back to Natural England for a minimum 30-year period. Can you imagine that? We've got to go and visit these sites to see if the biodiversity units are still there, what condition they're in, then log all that through a GIS system that links back to the planning application. So DEFRA acknowledged there is going to be an extra burden on all local authorities, and at some point there will be some money available. We don't know yet how we would bid for that. But the piece of work we're doing with the consultancy at the moment is trying to work out what are the burdens going to be on us as an individual district and for what different parts of our council, and also across West Yorkshire as well. It might be we can share some of those resources. So before DEFRA open up the doors to applying for this extra burden, we need to know where do we need those resources to be put. So does that answer your question to a degree?
So the concern is that will the expectation be for the developers to provide the data?
Yeah.
In which case, what confidence would we have in it?
Yes, sorry, yeah, just to come back on that, what I was going to say was at the moment, the ecological reports land on my desk and I read those spreadsheets. It takes time for me to do that, and more often than not, I'm having to challenge the consultants that are working for the developers, because maybe I don't think they've done it properly. So there will definitely be an incentive for ecological consultants to decrease the biodiversity unit value at the outset and show they're providing something really good afterwards. And it's only down to people like me that can pick apart what they're saying in the spreadsheet to think, is it realistic what you're saying you're going to achieve? You know, so if you're saying you're going to create a really good quality lowland meadow and it's going to be really high quality, But what is the reality of all that? That's where I've got to put my reality glasses on and think, actually, that's not, achievable. Is that okay?
I think, yeah, that does answer Councillor Lamb's question. I just need to move things on is all. But I think we're going to need more Richards, basically. So in terms of the implications on the council, I've got Councillor Collins and Councillor Anderson, and then Councillor Hayden. Now, are these new things that haven't been touched on yet? Because I am slightly conscious of time. So if members and officers could be relatively brief, that would be
I
great.
think mine's fairly quick. When it comes to developers having to make a financial contribution because they can't meet the biodiversity on site, is DEFRA going to set that, how much they pay, or is that a local authority?
The Environment Bill's fairly quiet on setting it yourselves locally at a local authority level, but what Natural England are working on is a national biodiversity credit. So like I was saying earlier, there's some options available. Has a developer got land they own and can deliver it on that land? If not, can the local authority offer the option to take on the responsibility at a set amount? If that is not available, the other option, the last one, is they go to Natural England nationally and they buy some biodiversity credits that just get delivered nationally somewhere. So I think we all have to be aware of that and make sure we have a system locally that we want it to deliver.
Thanks very much for that. Councillor Anderson.
Could do it in bullet form. Is there a definition as to what off-site actually means? Because in some wards, they're quite tightly fitting. So it'd be quite easy that off-site is somewhere within the ward. But there are some wards that stretch for miles and miles and miles. So is there a definition? The second one is, how are we going to deal with small builders? Because rightly or wrongly, the government are trying to make it easier for smaller builders to build houses. I don't think they've got the infrastructure to come up with that sort of information, or, and I don't mean this an insult necessarily, they want to, or the brain power to actually do it. They're builders, first and foremost. And then secondly, how would you deal with land that's going to be set aside for self-build? Because the one house on its own might not have a positive or negative effect, but cumulatively it will do. And, how do you deal with the cumulative impact of that? The other problem we're going to have is visual. I agree with what we're doing, but if you look at the grass verge cutting we've got in the city at the moment, it's splitting the community. Some think it's absolutely fantastic. Others are very critical of what's happening. So that we're going to have to sell a bit more as to what biodiversity means in those local fields. And then the final thing is, and this is probably more towards the Chief Planning Officer, is this not an opportunity for income earning, that if we give you the resources, you could sell your skills to the other West Yorkshire authorities and it can become an income generating service for the council?
Okay, I'll try and get through those fairly quickly. Yeah, where is off-site? Is it in the same ward or is it in neighbouring wards or somewhere else in the district? What I would say at the moment is we haven't really bottomed that one out. I think we'd be looking for guidance to say that, really. Yeah. Second one is small buildings. I mean, 10% is 10% of whatever it is in the first place. So if you've got a fairly small site with, say, half a biodiversity unit on it, it's just a 10% increase from that, isn't it? So the burden is relative, really. But just saying that, there's a separate biodiversity metric being launched tomorrow, and it's out for consultation for small developments in particular. So that's launched tomorrow, and there'll be probably a 6-month consultation period where they see how it works. So I haven't seen that small development metric yet. So that is being thought about as well. The one to do with land for self-build, I'm not too clear really on that one. I mean, again, 10% is 10% regardless of size. Cumulative impact doesn't really come into it. It's just each site would be assessed on its own merits. The visual thing, that's a key thing. If we start providing more biodiversity across the whole of Leeds, I mean, I think that's a good thing. I love scrub. Not everyone likes the look of scrub or longer grassland that's not regularly cut. So I think there is an education element to this and awareness raising. I'd like to think part of a scheme we can deliver is looking at high quality nature reserves created across Leeds. And by nature reserves, I don't mean there have to be the 400 hectares of St Aidan's, although that is great, but maybe small nature reserves. And part of being a nature reserve is to a degree, interpretation, whether it's online or interpretation panels or people helping like social green prescribing, those kind of things. So yes, you have to think about it definitely. And the last question, I think, was for David.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Yeah, a couple of things on that. I mean, there's a few strands to this. First of all, we want to see the provisions of the Environment Bill read across into the reforms to the planning system as well, rather than them being seen as a self-contained set of propositions in different legislation. We have to be able to deliver this through mainstream planning as well. And in doing that, as Richard has described, this is an additional burden. It is bringing high levels of new technical work and resource pressures to local authorities as well as other partners within the biodiversity world. I think in terms of income, it's a very valid point you've made. The challenge we have is that, first of all, we need to see what additional resources we get from central government, given that this is an additional burden. If we did have local expertise within Leeds, yes, we could drive income from that, subject to the capacity of that team to service Leeds's biodiversity needs as well as anybody else's. The challenge, though, is if we don't meet the income target, it becomes a budget pressure for us. So there's a balance to be struck. So it is certainly something we are across and something we'll need to take into account.
Excellent. Okay. Councillor Hayden.
I'm just, we will have brownfield developments. We're looking at them all the time, where the biodiversity will go from practically zero to whatever it becomes. Is there any offsetting to be done for developers to say, if they increase the biodiversity by 50%, is there any offsetting that can be done across developments as well?
I think the main thing is if you've got a brownfield site and it's got very low value, we probably wouldn't even ask for the metric to be used. If it's virtually all sealed surface before, there's no point running the metric through because it'll just come up with probably zero, and 10% of zero is still zero. So we'd have to look at just wider biodiversity enhancements and good design, which is what we would try and encourage anyway. Because what I would say is biodiversity net gain and the metric is only one element of biodiversity enhancements. There's other things that can be done as well. Does that answer your question?
It does. What I'm trying to is that if we can promote, find some way of using this legislation to promote the big increases in biodiversity for developers, so that they find it easy to say, we've gone from zero to look how diverse it is now biologically. I'm just wondering whether this will help us to, really, I know developers are keen on it anyway, because people want to live in a green, they don't want to live in a concrete jungle anymore. But I'm just wondering whether this legislation can help to, not just the 10%, because as you say, 10% nothing is nothing, isn't it? But, that we can really use this legislation to go way beyond that 10%.
Just two quick things I would respond to that. And one of them is the 10% is a minimum. The Environment Bill is stating that's a minimum 10%. And really it's up to us to decide what we're aiming for, but we have to be aware of viability as well on a developer. Just to make you aware, I know of one local authority across the country that's gone above 10%, and that's Lichfield. They've gone for 20%, and they've been doing that for the last 3 or 4 years, I think. The other thing I would say is it's not just about this legislation. There's other things coming through from government. There's an awful lot of guidance. There's the 25-year environment plan, which I would suggest everyone does have a look through. It's difficult to keep up to date with all these things, but in the 25-year environment plan, it talks about everyone having high quality natural green space near to where people live and work. And I think that's something we should really try and work towards and try and align biodiversity net gain with natural green space near where people live, especially people in the communities that they don't have very much and they have big mental health problems and physical health problems as well. That's the big challenge, but that's where I'd like to think we can move in that direction.
All right, folks. I've got one quick question from Councillor Lamb, then we're going to move on to first homes.
Thank you, Chair. It's for Mr. Feeney, really. Following on from what you said, I agree with you about the importance of getting the Environment Bill and the Planning Bill to work together. Where do you see this sitting in the planning balance? Because I think all of us around this table would like it to have significant weight. The fear is it's another one of those things that ultimately will fall down the pecking order And I think it's where we've got to make sure it really is punitive if you're saying you can't deliver on site.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. It's a good question. Well, it has weight now. We have a policy framework in Leeds, G9, that Richard referred to, and I think we were sort of pioneering in having that policy. I think what we haven't had are the detailed metrics and the mapping information that Richard has described. I think the more we can do on that to establish the local methodology in Leeds and how we see this being implemented, that will help give it greater weight, because then we're able then to evidence that as part of a development scheme. So then it will be down to, a planning balance, looking at all of the other policy considerations in looking at an individual planning application and the weight that we can attach to it. If we've got a comprehensive policy framework around this issue, then we can give that full weight as part of that planning application, as part of that planning balance. But there will be other factors to consider as part of that planning balance, affordable housing or whatever it might be. But certainly having the evidence behind the policy and that detailed local evidence in terms of the application of the policy will give it, the strongest weight we can give it locally.
Right. On that, folks, I want to move on to first home. So Martin, swiftly, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So the final part of this first paper then, from para 19 onwards, sets out government's proposed approach to first homes, which is its affordable home ownership policy, which was firmed up by a ministerial statement in May and changes to the planning practice guidance shortly after. And what that does is sets an expectation that first homes will become part of a local authority's affordable housing provision. It will be homes for sale with a 30% discount on market value, and 25% of the homes that would otherwise be affordable should be first homes. So any affordable housing contribution that the council would currently collect from a developer will have 25% of it go towards first homes. The remaining 75% of those homes will be split between the social rented, which the council currently has in policy H5, and intermediate, which is for rented products to meet those on lower quartile, so lower 25% incomes. So in terms of implications for Leeds, it will change what that affordable housing mix of tenure currently looks like. So instead of being 40% intermediate, 60% social rented, we think it will look something like 25% first homes, 15% intermediate, and then 60% social rented. The 60% social rented does remain kind of ring fenced. And this was one of the concerns that we expressed to government through the consultation, was the impact on social rented provision. Government solution is to ring fence that and prioritise social rented within any components of affordable housing. Now, the government is clear that this be rolled out, taken into account at the next update of the local plan, and certainly if local authorities wish to have any flexibility in terms of the discounts to be applied to first homes, i.e. not 30% cheaper than market value, but 40 or 50% cheaper than market value, or any changes to the income ranges that can apply to, then they'll need to do that through a plan making process. It's still very early days for us to be considering this, and we will start to look at the implications of this alongside our current and any need for future evidence-based updates. So really just bringing this today to alert members to the fact that it's now live. But what we will do is we're bringing an affordable housing delivery plan paper to this meeting in September. By then, hopefully, we'll have a bit more detail about that for members, but I'm happy to take any questions now.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of serious and structural problems with this as a policy approach. This is not how we should be spending public housing pounds. This is just extremely inappropriate, and it's building on the disaster of the starter homes policy, where no starter homes are actually built. And this is another try at it. It's a bit like going over the top very slowly towards the German heavy machine guns again in housing policy terms. I think I've got a couple of questions that Councillor Brooks has raised, and she's talked about, is there any way of going for higher levels of discount? I mean, whatever, look, folks, keeping the politics out of this panel as much as possible. I mean, we will try to game any government policy to get the most advantage for the people of Leeds, no matter how inappropriate we think the policy is. And in the light of that, what are the opportunities for a bigger discount than 30%? Because 30%, I've got a lot of constituents for who 30% discount off market prices is not really affordable, at all. And a 50% discount might slightly bring it down towards that level, but it's still an incredibly large amount of money when you see what's up for market sale in this city. So that's my opening starter. And then I've got Councillor Campbell's indicated he wanted to speak. So, but let Martin answer this, Colin. If you don't mind, let Martin answer that one, and then you can come in. Yeah, thank you.
So thanks, Chair. Yes, there is an opportunity. The government allows you to go for 30% discount, 40% discount, or 50% discount. 40 and 50% discount must be driven through a plan review with evidence to support that.
I like that for a nice, concise answer. That's excellent. Councillor Campbell, then Councillor Collins.
Can I apologise for arriving a little late? Whip's got a bit hairy. Just a couple of points on page 17. A couple of questions on 20. On bullet point 20, it talks about a price cap of 250,000. There are, I hate to say it, but there are parts of the city where you wouldn't get anything for anything like 250,000, and I just wonder, what, in effect, are we simply saying, or are they simply saying that you end up with 1 bedroom or at best 2 bedroom pokey little developments on certain sites to meet this request? And on 22, it talks about, in effect, the local authority would have to accept a development on unallocated sites outside the SAP area, providing it was first home led. What's a first home led development?
Thanks, Councillor Campbell. So in answer to your first question, there is local discretion to set different caps. Again, that would have to be done through an update, through a plan review and accompanied by evidence. And in terms of first home-led development, that's not clear yet. This is still within the planning practice guidance, not in the National Planning Policy Framework yet. Some clues to what that might mean are around the wording for entry-level exception sites that currently exist within the NPPF. So there is currently a route in. So if a local authority has a rural exceptions policy, for example, to limit that to affordable home ownership or rental for people that have got a connection to rural places but can't otherwise afford to live there. That's currently in the NPPF at the moment, but it doesn't overtake Greenbelt. So if they were to keep the first homes exception sites in line with that, it's likely that this wouldn't trump Greenbelt, but that hasn't had any clarity yet, and we await for the NPPF to see what happens on that.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious, how do you think this is going to go? I mean, if these homes are made available, is it first come, first serve, or are people who want these homes, are they going to be means tested in some way? I mean, obviously they're going to have the criteria they don't currently own a home, but who is going to get these homes?
So there is an administrative burden from this change of policy as well. And I think that largely is going to rest with the council in order to be the gatekeepers in terms of looking at how these homes are provided. at this stage, we can only say it's going to be similar to the way that we manage waiting lists and housing associations manage rental properties through some demonstration of need and through some demonstration of income. So there's some rules and regulations that will need to be applied to people being able to purchase the first homes. But that's another side of this, other than the planning that still needs to be worked out.
Yes, it's almost like it's not being hugely well thought through, to put it bluntly. Like I said, we will try to game any government policy to maximise the advantage of the people of Leeds. But every first homes discount that goes, that's a genuinely affordable home that's not being built. And this will eat into the amounts of affordable rented homes that are provided in the city through the current system. And it'll do nothing to affect the structural problems that we have in the housing market or housing system in this city. So I'm cards on the table, guys. I'm not a fan of this policy, but there you go. Do we have any more questions on it? Because I'd like to move on to our next item at all. Oh, Councillor McKenna, I do apologise. You raised questions in the first item, please. Sorry.
I did, Chair, but I did jump the gun a bit, but I'm leaving soon. I've got a bubble collapse. I've got to pick a child up. But my main question was probably to Martin, that first homes is exempt from developers' ability to cry that this is not viable, get the district valuer in and not produce any affordable. And the other one I did ask was, and I used paragraph 25 to say that in the city areas, my ward and many around the tables ward, the affordability of properties only goes to £100,000. 17% of my ward could only afford £100,000. I'm surprised it's that high, actually. And 1% could only afford 1,500. We do have the ability, obviously, to vary the discounts. And as I said at the time, we talk about levelling up. We hear very little from the government, particularly at the Batley by-election on the doorstep. And there was comments made by somebody who we know very well in that election. And I think in Leeds, there's a certain amount of levelling up needs doing. The difference between some of the out here areas and the inner city areas is almost as great, if not greater, than the difference between the London area and the northwest and the northeast. And I just wonder, is it addressing any of those things? I suppose it's not, but I mean, I can ask.
Martin, do you want to go for that?
So in answer to the first part of your question, Councillor McKenna, it would be 25% of the agreed affordable housing provision. So if that affordable housing provision were to shrink in line with a viability argument, it would be 25% of that shrunken provision. That makes sense? So you'd still ring fence 25% of whatever provision for affordable housing was viably delivered on the site. And then the 15% intermediate and 60% social rented would also be shrunk as well. And in answer to the second part of the question, yes, I understand that, and those income disparities we did put them back to government in the consultation, but government's response to that would be that Leeds can set its own discount if it doesn't feel that 30% is going to make these homes affordable.
Do you want to ask that on camera? Yeah.
Sorry, what is the mechanism for resetting the level of discount?
So Councillor Grunt, that would have to be done through a policy review, which would have to be done through a plan making process that would be subject to independent examination and consultation.
So in other words, it's as difficult as possible to do and as lengthy a process as it's possible to have.
Not only is it difficult and lengthy, it's not a serious policy for affordable housing. It's trying to address systemic market failure by pushing more precious public housing pounds into volume house builders' profit margins. And that's all it's going to do. And on that happy note, I'm going to move on to agenda item 8. Oh yeah, sorry, Councillor Lamb.
And just to clarify, they're your personal opinions you're expressing. You've said we several times, but it's your view. personally, I keep an open mind until I've got all of the facts and information before I come to a political judgment, but that's for you. So my question is, how in effect does the local discretion work? Is it citywide? Is it by HMCA? Is it application by application? Or can it be any combination thereof?
So it would be for the local authority through its plan making review, through its evidence base and its update of its SHMA, strategic housing market assessment, which looks at the need versus income within different parts of Leeds. So it would be any of the above potentially. We could have it on a similar way to that we currently have it in terms of affordable housing zones, or it could be different to that.
So you could say the discount in Armley is 50%, the discount in Adel is 30%, the discount somewhere else is 40%.
If the evidence were there to support that, my understanding would be yes.
Councillor Anderson, of course.
Can we charge a differential rate in an area if they're using greenfield rather than brownfield sites? Because a lot of the major housing developers love building on greenfield and fight against brownfield. Can we incentivize it by saying, if you want to build on greenfield, you've got to give a bigger discount?
That would be something we could consider through scoping a plan policy, but I don't think so. But we could certainly look at that if we were considering this, because I think we're gonna have to bring through this group, this advisory panel, so some options and ideas for how we move this forward.
Should this survive the Whitehall policy process? I think we're spending a lot of time examining this, Councillor Anderson, to get into the fine grain and detail on this. But there's enough strategic information there we already have to know it's probably not going to work particularly well for the people of Leeds. On that note, let's move on to agenda item 8. We're going to do the local development scheme 21 to 24 in 19 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Members will be familiar with this. We have this most years, and it is in effect our work programme in terms of plan making and the development plan for the next 3 years. So what it sets out in the appendix from page 25, first of all, an executive summary to simplify and clarify what each of the component parts of the development plan are. It clarifies on page 31 progress that's been made in terms of plan updates. And you'll see there that during 2020 and 2021, there were a number of neighbourhood plans that were made within Leeds. It also clarifies under section 5, beginning of page 31, the plans that we currently have in preparation. And members will be aware that we currently have 2 of those, the local plan update and the site allocations plan remittal. It then sets out what our next plan making processes may be, and it does that on page 8 under 2 headings. The first is around those review policies that we already have in adopted plans, and members will recall that in the adopted SAP we have 2 policies, one which looks at a SAP review and one which looks at mechanisms for when we may trigger a need to look again at more sites for gypsies and travellers. It then on page 32 sets out what the process for any future local plan update may be. Executive board having already taken a decision to focus the scope of the local plan update 1 on climate change and health and wellbeing and infrastructure, but there are a whole series of other planning matters. And what this local development scheme does is clarify when they will be considered within the plan making process. And that's included within the back end of the local development scheme in the tables that accompany the report. And the key table there really is setting out what the scope of any future local plan update, what we're calling local plan update 2, might include. So really this charts progress of the plans that we've done this past year. It sets out where we're going in terms of plan making, and in effect sets out what the agenda for this panel is likely to look like over the coming months and next few years. So whilst we're progressing with Local Plan Update 1, this panel can expect to be receiving discussion papers on those other matters that are within the local development schemes, such as first homes, housing requirement, employment, local and town centres, minerals and waste, for example. So if there are any detailed questions, I'm happy to take those from members.
Councillor Anderson.
Presumably we need to be flexible in that the government are going to be coming forward with a heck of a lot of detailed plans, amendments. The MPPF is going to be altered. So a lot of our plans, we could be one step forward, but then have to revisit it again because, you know, we've heard today about a potential lack of interconnectivity between a lot of the policies that the government are coming in with, that one doesn't necessarily complement the other and that one might supersede one, but that one might be 6 months later coming down the line. So, I mean, I just think it's something we've got to be aware of more than anything else. So you cannot be held responsible for it, but I think we have got to make sure that we've built in some flexibility to our work plan to enable us to react when the government come forward with something like this.
Yeah, I think we're going to be kept busy is the short version. I know Mr. Feeney wants to come in on this.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to mention that issue, Councillor Anderson. I mean, clearly we do need to be flexible in terms of the changes coming down the line in terms of the planning reforms. I think what we don't know yet precisely is what form will they take in detail, and also, depending on that detail, what transitional arrangements there might be for their introduction. But if we can set what we think our local priorities are and get some momentum, it may be that under the transitional arrangements, we might be allowed to finish what we've started before the new requirements come in. So I think the more we can do now to try and set a direction and a programme, I think that's really, really helpful, whilst being mindful to other changes which might come down the line. Thank you.
Is it a plans panel? The number of applications that come back that we can't alter because they've been, you know, the first homes one is another example. If it's been through outline already and up to, is it March 2022 or something, you know, so any applications that come in the next few months won't apply. So it's very difficult when you're in plans panel, when you're arguing for something and then an officer says, well, good idea, councillor, but you can't do that because, you know, it's, I don't know how we manage it. I just don't know how we manage that type of problem.
That's always a real feature of the system when the planning, when things policy is in flux, and we just have to manage it as best we can. I mean, Martin, do you want to come in on that?
I think, Chair, this does look quite complicated, and it does result in quite a complicated plan. So I think it is really important that we have a cohesion and a cohesiveness to the different parts of the development plan. This sets out not only what bits of the plan that we're looking at updating next, but the review process that we go through, and the last time we did that was in July last year, sets out the fit for purposeness of policies. So I think it's going to be important for us as we move forward to provide that context of, whilst we might need to review some of these or update some of these policies, we're not saying they're out of date, or we're not saying they're not fit for purpose to take development decisions within Leeds. They just need to be subject to have the council's priorities changed? Is there different evidence that we might need to reflect in this policy? And how do we reflect things like the housing figure uplift and the standard methodology, for example, on our housing numbers? So as we take these papers through, I think it's important to have an element of that says, this is what the cohesive plan and its various parts looks like, and this is the programme for change.
Right. I hope that answers those questions. I'm not seeing any of the members wanting to speak. Councillor Hayden.
Just very quickly on the local plans, I just want to express my thanks, and you know, I'm really impressed with how officers have approach local plan making, and we do seem to be a bit of an outlier as an authority in terms of our local plans, and that list is really impressive and there's more in the pipeline. So I just want to compliment the department and those officers with, you know, they've tackled some really complex issues and, you know, and ensured that, you know, there's a good relationship and that these local areas really get the kind of plans that they want. So just to pass on my thanks for that.
I very much second that as well. We're a leading edge of council, I think, when it comes to planning. I hope we are anyway. On that, folks, are we finished on this item? Yeah? Well, fantastic. And we're in health and safety time as well. Within 10 minutes, that's excellent. Well, folks, in that case, I'll wrap the meeting up. Thank you very much for all your contributions, and I hope to see you again soon, in person, perhaps. Thank you.